West, and I'm with the Grow Appalachia program, and I have been with them for about 8 years. Grow Appalachia has been a program for 12 years, and Scott Christian Care Center has been a part of that for 10. Well, over these 12 years, all sites have grown 500 million pounds of organic produce. That number just is amazing to me to hear that much produce being grown. And over $1 million worth of organic produce has been sold at farmers markets. So the program is set up and based on growing organically and to try to keep all those pesticides and everything off of your vegetables, off your plate, and out of your body. So we offer educational parts, and we will do a class one time a month, and we will base those classes upon the growing season. And we have a great, I have a great team of people who are helping me, and this year is going to be so amazing. Last year, COVID hit, and I feel like a lot of the educational part kind of fell through because we couldn't meet and we couldn't get together. And that's the fun part of the program, is getting a garden community family. So I'm going to introduce everybody. My name is Rhonda West, and I am the program director of Grow Appalachia.
I'm Tracy Goodman. I'm the McCreary County Agriculture Agent.
Hi, my name is Sean Tremolin. I'm the UT TSU Extension Ag Agent here in Scott County. And then pass it on.
I'm Doug Stevens. I'm from McCreary County. Do I need?
Please just speak with it.
Oh, okay. McCreary County actually joined Scott County, I think, on the second or third year.
Yes.
Okay, and we've been a part of it ever since and enjoyed every minute of it.
Yes. Teresa Honeycutt.
I'm Teresa Honeycutt, and I work here in the UT office for the 10-step program. And I gave you the form that filled out. You've got the green bags for it. At the end, toward the end of the season, we'll do those again. And what I'm going to do during the course of it is we'll introduce some recipes and some different things like that as we go. And I will bribe you. For every survey you filled out, I give presents. So we'll hope you, but we're so glad you're here. I've been a part of Grow Appalachia since 2012. So I guess that's coming up on 9 years, 8 years, something like that. My first 3 years as a participant, and since then I've been a volunteer in the program. I love this program, so I'm glad you're all here. It's a good program.
And I would like to everyone who came in and was signing in, that's Miss Kathleen Moore. She is a wonderful volunteer for the program. She's been a participant for the program for 4 years. And now she volunteers for the program. She's a wonderful, wonderful asset to the team. So this year we're going to be able to do a lot of social platforms. Like we'll have videos, YouTube channels, things like that. So if you can't attend a meeting, you will be able to view that and then go back for future reference to watch those. And in your binders, you will see a page that says general information. And that's going to give you all of our contact information who we just introduced. And we all certainly want you to reach out to us if you have questions, concerns during the season. And if we don't know an answer, we will find you the answer. So also I want to talk about lovely harvest sheet. This is what is in your binder. It looks like this, and it says harvest sheet. I know how tricky this is, but last year McCreary County and Scott County, Tennessee, we grew 34 tons of food. And I'm sure that I probably was a little on the low side, because I understand how hard it is when you go out in your garden and you pick and then you forget to write it down. I am very, very flexible, very flexible. This is what helps us get our funding for the following years. It lets them track how many pounds and tons of food that is grown. It's the most important thing for me. And I have to report on this every quarter. So these are real important. And I don't care if you write it on a piece of paper, a scratch pad, anything. It doesn't have to be this form. I can convert it myself. But I'll start calling and reminding everyone, hey, I need harvest, 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 harvest. You can email these to me. You can take a picture of them and text them to me. You can slide them under the door at the Scott Christian Care Center, or you can put them in the mail and mail them to me. And I will start, when it starts getting close to time, you'll start seeing emails and text messages and say, hey, I need harvest. I have talked to most everyone, and I believe that I have real good contact information for you all. I like to reach out through text message and emails, and now that during COVID, you're going to receive a lot more emails with a lot of information that we will be sharing with you. So try to check your emails regularly and see what's coming up. Also, I want to remind everyone, I do a blog every month, and I love for you to take pictures of your garden, of your harvest, and email them or text them to me, and I share those on the blog. It's so exciting. It excites other gardeners, and it excites me so much. I'm like a child, like, oh, look at that little baby fruit, whatever it is. So if you will do that, that will really, really help me a lot. We've included a piece of graph paper in there, and they're going to talk to you a little bit later about garden planning. That's going to be a real important thing to turn in tonight before you leave. I think that's pretty much it. I want everyone to know that you have a class schedule in your binder. And if anything happens or comes up, you'll start getting text message from me to say the meeting's been rescheduled or, anything like that. But by that time, we will also be sending out links for you to be able to watch the videos. So does anybody have any questions for me so far? I know I loaded you up with a lot of information just then. Okay, well, again, my name is Rhonda, and you're going to hear a lot from me. I'm the one who's going to call, and you might be looking at your phone saying, it's her again. But I'm so glad that you guys are part of the program. It's a wonderful, wonderful program. It helps teach, the generational knowledge of growing and keeping that in our families, because we are losing that. So I'm real excited about this year, and all throughout the year, like I said, if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to reach out to any of us. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tracy.
To do for garden planning, and some of those things are site selection, soil testing, and planning your space out. So I like to kind of start off by reminding people, because there is a lot of information out there on gardening. Not just information that we would give you, it's information all over the internet about different things you can do. And I like to remind people to relax and not to overthink it too much. This is supposed to be fun. I want you all to enjoy having your own garden and not make it a stressful experience. So I like the quote that there are no gardening mistakes, only experiments. And that is how I operate in my own garden. Basically, my garden is an experiment from year to year. I'm always trying new things. I'm always failing at things too. And it's definitely okay if you make some mistakes here and there. And one of the first things I wanted to mention is where we are. So the map that you see up there is the USDA Plant Hardiness Zone map. And for us, McCreary County, Kentucky, and Scott County, Tennessee, we're classified mostly as Zone 6B. There are little pockets in McCreary County that are 6A, but I generally say that we're in Zone 6. So what that means is that the average minimum temperature each winter is from 0 to -10 degrees Fahrenheit. So what this means for the garden is that you want to choose plants that grow well within that zone. And most of the time, you'll have this information on seed packets. So sometimes you will actually see that map on your seed packets. And kind of what's more important than the plant hardiness zone, I think, is knowing your first and last frost dates. So our nearest climate station is in Newcomb, Tennessee. They have our last frost date listed as April 27th. And the first frost is October 14th, and we have about a 170-day growing season. So this is really important to know. These are estimated dates. I would really stress that. As you know, our weather is kind of unpredictable. Obviously, last week we had a huge winter storm. This week we have really nice days, so spring can kind of fool you sometimes. So I would take these days, maybe look at your weather on our last frost date, and look at your weather forecast about 10 days out, because you don't want to set out any kind of frost tender plants. So you want to think about things like tomatoes and peppers. Those are really frost tender plants, and they will die if you set them out when there is a frost coming. And you don't want to scramble to have to cover things up. So I would just keep those dates kind of in mind and keep an eye on your weather forecast. Now, as for the garden, where do we put it? So if you're growing an in-ground garden, or if you're planting anything in general, you want it to have full sun for at least 8 hours a day. Most of your vegetable plants do require full sun. You want it to be a relatively level spot. You want it to be pretty well drained, and you want it to be close to a water source. Now, this is really important because you got to think about later in your gardening season. When you first start, the weather is kind of nice and cool, but you get to sometimes 100-degree days in the summer, so you don't want to be lugging water back and forth to your gardening site. So I would suggest either planting stuff close to your house, or maybe putting in a water source wherever your garden is going to be. And then you really only want to plant as large a garden as you can easily maintain. And I kind of struggle with this a little bit. It is easy to get excited. When you see seed packets, you kind of get excited about what the possibilities are and what you could plant. And also, seeds are tiny little things. So you have to visualize what these plants are going to look like once they mature. So I like to use an example of squash. So squash seeds are pretty tiny in general, but they make a pretty big sprawling plant. So a general, like a yellow summer squash, you need about 3 to 4 feet of space for that squash. Now, I planted spaghetti squash last summer, and that was my first time growing spaghetti squash. So I didn't realize that it vined out quite as big as it did. It gets almost as big as a pumpkin vine. So it ended up taking up a lot more space in my garden than I really wanted it to. So I would definitely read the back of your seed packets. It should tell you how big everything is going to get and what kind of habit that it grows in, and plan your garden space around that. And then think about what you really want to grow. So I know that it's easy to get excited and try a lot of new things, or want to try a lot of new things, but for the sake of planning, I would narrow it down to what you know your family's going to eat. Grow enough of that. If you are planning to grow a surplus and sell at the farmer's market, I would also plan for that. So definitely the planning process is where you really want to start. And there are several gardening options besides just the traditional in-ground straight row garden. I love the option of raised beds. I think these are great. I incorporate them myself. And typically what you think of as a raised bed is like the pictures on the right. But you can make a raised bed by forming your soil up, mounding it, and shaping it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a structure. You can use a taller option, which I think is also great, that would accommodate a wheelchair. It would also keep you from bending over and breaking your back, so I really love that option. And then you can also use the structured raised beds in the bottom. You can make them out of almost anything. You can use cinder blocks, you can use wood. There are a lot of options for creating raised beds. And the benefits to raised bed is that you can keep your soil intact a little better in those. So it's not going to, if you have problems with soil erosion, that's not really going to happen. If you have a space to contain your soil, you can amend it really easily. You don't need a tiller. So that's really a great option for gardening. And I also love container gardening, mostly because if you don't have a large outdoor space or anywhere necessarily to put a garden, you can use any variety of containers to grow vegetables in. So the picture of on the far left is actually a kiddie pool that I used last summer to grow herbs in. Now the picture looks kind of sad, but this is actually a picture that I took today. These are herbs that I planted last year. So they were able to withstand, these got piled on with snow and everything, and I still have parsley and oregano growing in there. So that is a really great option for growing herbs, or you can pretty much grow anything in a kiddie pool, as long as you have little drainage holes in it. And I also really like the recyclable, reusable grocery bags, because they already have handles on them. They're generally drained pretty good because of the material that they're made out of, and you can move them around easily because they have handles in them. And then of course you have your traditional flower pots, and then window boxes. I've also seen people grow a lot of herbs in window boxes. I think that'd be a great idea. Outside your kitchen window, you can grow you some herbs. And this is what my garden kind of started out as. This is the traditional in-ground straight row garden. You can produce a ton of vegetables this way. It's a tried and true method. You're not going to go wrong if you plant anything like this. And this is kind of what my garden developed into. I use a lot of different methods. Like I said, I like to experiment. I have some trellising, I have vertical gardening, I have raised beds in there. I do still plant some stuff in the ground, but I like to just kind of experiment with different methods and see what works best for my property. So I definitely encourage you all to do the same. Try out some different stuff and see what works for you. Now we're going to talk about what good soil is. Good soil retains water, but it still drains pretty well. It stays pretty crumbly and workable. It has enough minerals for optimum growth, and it has a pH between 6.2 and 6.8. So that's the dream scenario. That's the kind of soil that you want to eventually get to. But I will say that few gardening sites actually match this, all of this, in the ideal way. Your soils can be modified, which is what we're going to talk about in the next little bit. It takes a little while for you to amend your soil completely, but the good thing is that vegetables are really tolerant crops. They can withstand very poor soil and still produce fairly well. So soil testing is something that we offer at the McCreary County Extension Office and at the Scott County Extension Office. I think it's such an important resource that we offer people because it tells you what's actually available in your soil and what you actually need to add to it to grow anything that you want to grow. So it is important to conduct a soil test before you start to grow anything so that you can make sure you add enough fertilizer, enough nutrients that your vegetables are going to need. So a general soil test, it measures your pH, it measures the available phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and zinc. And I'll talk about these a little bit more and why they're important. And as I said, your results are definitely going to help you determine what kind of fertilizer, lime, sulfur, that you need to apply to that. Now, to collect a soil sample, you generally can use almost anything. You're digging up dirt is what you're doing. We have soil probes at the Extension office that you can come and borrow if you want to. You can also use just a regular garden trowel or a spade, whatever you want. Just as long as you get a good sample, that's all that really matters. You need a clean, dry plastic bucket if you're gonna mix your sample. And I say plastic because if you use metal, those metals might interact with your sample. So you don't want that. You wanna use a clean, dry plastic bucket that nothing has really been in. And we have soil sample bags at the extension office. I think you all have boxes. They have boxes that they use for that. So I didn't bring the bags with me, but typically people will bring me their samples in like a little Ziploc bag or something like that, and I can transfer it to the bag from there, and we'll send it off for you. And one thing that I really ask is that you measure the square foot of your garden or your raised beds. This is important information for us to know so that we can recommend the appropriate amounts of fertilizer or lime that you need to apply to your garden area. So I generally say that for a garden, you need to collect at least 10 cores, and you need to sample them randomly throughout your growing area. And I typically tell people if you're planting vegetables, those requirements are not going to differ so much, so you can sample the whole area that you're planning to plant vegetables in. If you're planting anything like fruit, those require a little bit different nutrients in your soil. So if you're doing something like blueberries, those require really acidic soil. So your nutrient requirements are going to be a lot different when you're growing fruit versus vegetables. So I actually have a picture of our soil sample bag there, and there's a line on it that you can fill it up to. So if anyone needs those, they can stop by the extension office and grab one. For tilled areas, I would take a sample to the depth of about 6 to 8 inches. So you want to think about the depth of your tillage operation, because what your tillage does is it turns your soil over, and that topsoil is what you're going to be planting in. So you want to take it to that depth. For non or reduced tilled areas, so if you have like a raised bed that you don't till in at all, you want to take a core of about 3 to 4 inches down. Now this is where I'm talking about some of the plant nutrients. So there are 2 categories for essential plant nutrients. There's macronutrients, which are required in relatively large amounts, and then there's micronutrients that are required in small amounts. So your macronutrients are things like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. You'll see this listed a lot on your fertilizer bags. That's what mostly those consist of. And then things like calcium, sulfur, and magnesium are also required. All of these things are going to help with vegetative growth, with flowering and fruiting, with root development, with all the stuff that you need to grow your vegetables and get good production. And then micronutrients are required in very small amounts, and these are things like copper, zinc, iron, and boron. And the pH scale, you've probably seen this back in school. It ranges from 0 to 14, with 7 being neutral, and we'll talk a little bit about why pH is important in a little bit. But if your pH comes back below 7, that means that your soil is fairly acidic. If it comes back above 7, that means that your soil is fairly alkaline. So the reason that pH is so important is because it directly affects the availability of your plants to uptake the nutrients that are already in your soil. So you may actually have all of the required nutrients that you need, but if your pH is off, it's not going to allow that plant to capture those nutrients. So by adjusting that pH, we can make sure that the plants use anything that we add to the garden, anything that's already there. Now, as I said, most vegetables prefer pH between 6.2 and 6.8. So if your pH falls out of this range, generally what you would add is lime or sulfur. So if you have a low pH, I would say anything below a 6, you might need to add a little bit of lime to raise it up. If you have a high pH, I would say anywhere above a 7, you might need to add some sulfur because your pH is too alkaline. So this chart kind of shows you how all of this is a balance. So you'll see the pH down at the bottom. Between 6 and 7, that's where most of these nutrients lie, and that's where your plant is going to be able to pick up the bulk of those nutrients that it needs. So that's why adjusting your pH is so important, in addition to making sure your soil has enough nutrients. So I would definitely say you only want to add in the fertilizer as recommended based on your soil test results, because you don't want to over apply fertilizer just like you don't want to under apply it. Over application can definitely affect your plant growth, and a lot of people I've seen do over apply fertilizer, and that's kind of just a waste of money if you're buying fertilizer from the store, because you may not even need to add that much. The good news is when you get your soil test back, you don't have to do any kind of math or calculations. That is our job, is to recommend what you need, the amounts that you need for your space. And I will also say that soils do benefit from added organic matter too, not just from fertilizer or lime. So these are things like peat moss, like compost, well-aged manure. You never want to use fresh manure on anything. These improve that texture of your soil, it improves the drainage, and it improves the ability for your soils to hold those nutrients in it. And this is a chart that is actually in the book that Rhonda emailed to you all. It's called Kentucky Gardening Book. It's ID 128. So this is a chart of side dressing. So sometimes your vegetables do require additional nutrients throughout the season. This will be, most of the time, nitrogen is what they require, and the chart actually tells you when you need to apply that and how much to apply. And this is the book that I was talking about, Home Vegetable Gardening in Kentucky. If you ever need a printed copy of that, you can come to the McCreary Extension office and I can provide one for you. And that is what I use probably more than any resource at all. And I mean, I teach these classes, but I use this resource all the time. It's so valuable. It has a lot of information in it that you really help you get started. And then I have also plugged our McCreary Extension YouTube channel. It's kind of new. We started it last year whenever COVID started because we had to start doing a lot of videos. I have a lot of gardening videos on there, and I'm gonna still do some this season, so stay tuned for those. You may learn from some of my failures as well. And then another one that is really great that you all can check out is University of Kentucky does something called Horticulture Webinar Wednesdays. And if you actually type that into your search bar, it'll pull it up and it's the first option. They do something every Wednesday on horticulture. They have a lot of beginner-friendly webinars that they do, and they're all recorded so you can go back and watch past webinars too. And then this is my contact information. If you all ever need anything related to gardening, feel free to give me a call or email me, and I'll actually provide you with a copy of this presentation. I'll send it to Rhonda so she can email it to you all as well. And that's all I've got. If anyone has any questions, just let me know. Yeah?
Can you use topsoil in a raised bed?
Topsoil?
Yeah, at Walmart.
Does it say it's for raised beds on it?
No.
Just regular topsoil? I might be a little bit careful about that. I'd maybe buy a bag of it and try first, because sometimes what they call topsoil is actually more like mulch than it is topsoil, and you don't necessarily want to plant stuff in that. So I would just kind of check and make sure that it is actual soil, that it's crumbly and workable and doesn't have a lot of other materials in it. But you can use it. Anybody else? Okay. Are you next, Doug?
We're going to talk about the soil sample with freedom of the
Yeah, go ahead and say something. Hey guys, and so with Tennessee side, it's very similar. And so instead of a bag, here's the boxes. And so they'll fold down. And again, like I said, very similar. You want to go ahead and collect about the 10 samples, looking for about a cup of soil when you're after, like, of the samples. And so then with that, you'll go ahead and randomly take your samples, maybe do some zigzags, collect about that 6 inches of depth. You don't want to have any organic material in it. So if there's some, like maybe you're putting in a new bed and there's some grass on top, some old sticks, rocks, anything like that. You want just the soil. So remove those out. And then once you have all your samples, go ahead and have, as said, some sort of container like a plastic bucket that's clean. You don't want to have other things that might contaminate your sample. And then put it in there, mix it up real well. Get it kind of, you don't want to have clumps or anything, and you don't want to have you don't want to have it nice and mixed well together. After that, then you can go ahead and take like a paper plate, maybe a piece of cardboard, and just lay the soil on that. So what that's doing is you'd like to have the soil dried. Having it wet as you send it, that increases mailing costs. The labs don't really want it, the moisture in there. So just go ahead and lay it out and let it dry. And then once it dries, don't do anything special, just let it sit out, Make sure it's not in the way for, animals or kids to knock it off or things like that. But afterwards, then that's where you put it into the box. And then you can go ahead and we have some forms to fill out. Simple things, pretty much saying, like this is what the sample is. So then when you see the soil result, the result page, like, okay, that's this garden. Or, this is the garden for vegetables versus garden for blueberries, strawberries, whatever the case is. And then also on there, you'll have different codes to indicate what you're growing there. And that's after about 2 weeks, it'll come back. And then you'll have your results to show what the soil, what the nutrients and stuff are in it, if there's any issues with it, and then what recommendations to help make it the best it can be. And that's one where, feel free to, if you have questions, go ahead and whether it's Kentucky or Tennessee, come on into the office and we can get your answers and we can make sure that you know exactly what you're doing so then the samples look great.
And for both places, like Kentucky participants will drop them off at the UK agent, and then also the Tennessee participants will drop them off here. Mm-hmm. And is there a tentative date that we can set for that? I know our next meeting is March the 18th, and that's when hopefully we'll have the organic fertilizer and things, so they would like to have those samples back. So what would be a good date for them to have their samples turned in?
Do you have a preference?
I would just say get your samples in as soon as possible, because I know that the labs get an influx of samples in the spring. So I would make sure and turn those in as soon as you can, just so that we can get your recommendations back in time for y'all to get your fertilizer.
Yeah, and I agree with that. It's one where obviously it's a busy time of year, and then there's about a 2-week period. So if you can go ahead and try to get in sooner rather than later. I know we're going to get rain, and so that might make it a little bit challenging. That's when we have to work with nature, but yeah, work on getting it back. And then if you can get it in about, a few weeks before the next meeting, then we can hopefully have results back around then to help make recommendations. And yes.
Are the samples taken before the soil is tilled or after?
If you're gonna till, I would probably do it after you till, just so you can make sure and take it deep enough.
Yeah, that's one where if you're going to be working the soil, it's just pretty much the most important part is getting that the depth of why we say about 6 inches. That's where the roots are going to be of the plants, and so it's not too big of a deal. So as long as you get that depth, that's where you're going to get your information from.
If they're gonna try to get those back by that date that Rhonda gave, they probably won't be tilling in the next week or so. Most of our areas won't till until May anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. If you are anticipating tilling, I would just make sure that you go deep enough, so like 6 to 8 inches. I would make sure and get that, and then if there's any kind of something growing on the top, I would just pick that off.
Yeah, that's one where just make sure any of that non-soil, the organic material like a growing grass, sticks, rocks, just pull that out so then you just have that 6 to 8 inches of soil. Anything else? Perfect. All right, well, I believe pass it on to you.
about some basics about seed starting. How many in here are anticipating that you're going to try to start your own seeds, or at least part of those this year? Hopefully, even if you're expecting to get the bulk of your plants and so on from the Grow Appalachia ones that they provide, like from the greenhouse or wherever, I'd highly recommend going ahead and experimenting with trying to start your own seeds pertaining to some things. It's a lot of fun. I want to talk to you, most of what I want to tell you today is the way not to do it, or actually the way to do it based on the fact that I did it wrong to begin with. So that's the best way to learn, is by your mistakes, right? So, it's not really hard. It's kind of like Tracy started out. Just relax. Don't get too excited in terms of worried. It's all right to get excited. Just don't get worried about it too much. There's a lot of ways you can do this, and you want to try to figure out the best way for you individually. So the way I do it is I try to purchase these seed trays. And you can buy these just about at any garden supply store, Walmart. If you're around Knoxville, a really good place to get it would be like Knox Seed. You can get them a lot cheaper, but if you're just going to need 2 or 3 or so, Walmart, or I'm sure the co-op probably has those and others. And I think Rhonda's brought a few for you all tonight anyway. So there's a couple of basic ones, and if I hold this one up, it's got soil in it. But you have one type of tray that does not have any holes in it, so it's just a solid tray. And another one that I try to use all the time is one that fits right down in it that has holes in the bottom. Now there's a method to my madness, or a reason for doing that, is because when you put your seed trays in there, and this is just the loose one that I've got, this is what, you probably won't start your seeds in these. What you'll do for some of the ones like tomatoes or peppers or so on, once you start them in the smaller seed compartments, then you'll want to transplant them into a bigger one so that they won't get root bound. But anyway, I like these because you can sit them in here. You don't want to keep your seed trays sitting in water all the time. The reason being, they will die, okay? The opposite of that is you don't want them to dry out either, because what happens if they dry out? They will die, okay? So I like this because I can keep that seed tray intact and lift it out of the one that the water's in, and that way I can sit it over and let it drain or whatever. So that's a good way to do it. When do you want to start your seeds? Now, today, whenever. Actually, you want to start your seeds probably somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks before that you would plant them in the garden. Okay? Any longer than that, you tend to possibly get root bound and they get stunted, and it may take a little bit for them to actually get growing well once you put them in the garden. But you don't want to plant them so close to the time that they're so small that they get lost in the weeds. That's only in my garden, okay? But anyway, so 6 to 8 weeks before you want to plant them. A lot of the things that we would plant, we don't want to plant till after that last frost date, right? But you said based on the Newcomb, Tennessee side is April 27th. Okay, so I go by May the 10th. I would rather do that. Last year, I had lots of stuff in the garden by May the 10th. And May the 10th, that night, and in the morning of May the 11th, we had not only a frost, but a freeze that was pretty devastating. I had to go out and gather up all kinds of things to cover up a lot of my stuff. I had potato plants that were out of the ground about so tall. I had some row cover for part of them, and I didn't have for part of them as well. So a day or two after that, I go out and I had 2 whole rows of potatoes that were, the green had died. And that was pretty scary. I had to round up 5-gallon buckets from everywhere to cover up my tomato plants. So the reality is, most of us want to get those plants out as soon as we possibly can, right? I know I'm talking about stuff that I'll probably talk to you about next week, but the warm season plants like tomatoes and peppers and your squash and your eggplants and all this kind of stuff like that, even if you plant them before then, they're just going to sit there because they don't like those cold soil temperatures. So the warm weather plants that you're going to look at planting, and I've got a chart up here. If anybody's interested in looking later, we'll try to figure out how to do that and socially distance as well. But to tell you when you should start your seeds and when you should plant them in the garden. So things like cabbage, broccoli, those kind of things, right now would be the time to do it because you're looking for cabbage about the latter part of March. Now you can plant them a little bit earlier than that in cabbage. They're cool. They'll survive a frost. They'll have a hard time with a real good hard freeze, but you can get them out a little bit earlier, but you may want to consider covering them over a little bit with something before that. Anyway, let's talk about, I spent all my time on the first topic. What do we use? What type of soil is best to use? Do we use garden soil? Do we use something that we would buy, let's say topsoil at Walmart or wherever? I would recommend going the extra mile and getting something that says seed starting mix, because that's an artificial soil. It has, well, it doesn't have compost. It doesn't have some of the things that, it's sterile for one thing, which means it doesn't have the disease organisms. The bad thing is if you start trying to plant something in soil that you mix up maybe with compost, it may have fungus, it may have all kinds of diseases in it, whatever, and your plant starts to grow and then it dies. And then you fret because here I am 2 weeks into this thing and I have to start over, so my time of planting ends up getting pushed later on. So use a sterile seed starting mix. And one mistake that I've always made, or not always, I've made a few times, I don't know if you can see these trays here. These are the smaller ones, but I would get that mix, dump it out on here, pack it down as tight as I could get it. Anybody ever do that? Just pack it down because you think the more soil you get in there, the better. Wrong. Okay, get this kind of loose, and it's good to compact it a little bit, but here's how you do that. And they'll make me clean up afterwards, but just kind of tamp it just a little bit and get that pressed down, but not pressed down too much, because if you press it down too much, then your roots of those tender seedlings will not be able to penetrate that soil very well, and you end up having problems. So what I do is I get it level, kind of drop it a little bit down, tap it in, and then based on whatever kind of seed you're planting, try to plant at least that deep in the soil. So I take a pencil, the eraser of a pencil, if you will, and I go and just make a little indentation in each of those rows, and then I label each of the rows. Why is it important to label? So you know what you got. You know. Right. So anyway, I do that. I go through and make sure that I plant the seeds I'm planting in that row, and I put them in that place. And instead of just kind of scooting the soil over to cover it up, I go through and put some more soil on top of it. Okay? Just a little bit, just to make sure you got good good soil contact with the seeds. Okay? Obviously, this stuff needs to be wet. Some people wet it before you put it in there. I don't. What I do is I take this tray and fill that up with water. And I put this in it, and don't push it down, just kind of let it float a little bit and sink down. And then I take some kind of a fine mist and wet the top. Because if you wet that top and the water's coming up from the bottom too, then it'll come up. If I try to wet that from the top, it's gonna take me a long time to get that whole tray, cell in that tray completely wet. This way it kind of wicks together in the dry soil. Okay. I almost forgot to do this, but what I do, even if you're getting a mix like this, it usually contains peat moss. And if you've ever looked at peat moss, it's got a lot of organic material in it, twigs, little chunks of stuff. I take a sifter. I just happen to have this one, but you can make one out of anything, just a 1/4 inch hardware cloth, and sift that soil into a container. And then, of course, you can rub it a little bit and push a lot of stuff that's clumped up on farther down, but sift it, because if you don't, when you go to try to plant that seed or make that little indention, you'll have a big clump of a stick or a mat of peat or something like that that just makes it a challenge. So anyway, sift it and use sifted soil to put on top of it. Okay. And I didn't bring one of these, and I should have. They make these little clear plastic domes that sit over the top of these. I would recommend using those when you first start out until that seed germinates. And then once it germinates, take that off, because if you keep it too humid after the seed or the plant germinates and pops through the soil, then you're creating an environment for fungus to cause that thing to dampen. They call it dampen off, where it just dies right at the surface of the soil. Okay, so what do? Once you got that in there and you got seeds coming up?
Get it to the light.
Make sure that it's got lots of light, because without light, if you sit this in your house and there's a window over to the side of where you got it, guess what that plant's going to do? It's going to get real long and leggy, and it's going to be leaning over toward that, because that's how they make their food, is using sunlight. So you want some kind of light, some kind of grow light, if you will. Put it next to a windowsill. If you put it close to a window, make sure you turn it around on a fairly regular basis so that at least it won't be totally leaned over one way. After that plant starts, first off, when it comes up, you'll have the cotyledon, the seed leaves that come up, and just in a few days or a week, you'll have true leaves show up. And we can all recognize when that happens. Once those true leaves start showing up on your plant, you need to start watering with a fertilizer. So a liquid fertilizer that you can dissolve in the water, and just spray that probably once a week, would you say, after that? And that way you can have good, healthy plants. What I try to do with mine, if you have a 61-degree day or a 71-degree day like we had yesterday, I try to take mine outside where it's a little bit warmer, where they can get a lot more light, and take it out from under my grow light and put it out there. That accomplishes several things. It gets it used to sunlight, but you don't want to just stick it out there and let's let it stay. Just periodically put it out there. But a hole in the bottom where you can push up with your finger. Can y'all see these holes? Take a pencil or something like that and get that out, put it in a larger one, and keep it growing. What do you use? If you don't have the seed trays, what can you use? What have you all used?
Cardboard egg cartons.
Cardboard egg cartons. They work great. Just sit that down in a little bit of water, get that thing wet, and just don't leave it in the water, and it'll do real well. You can also buy peat pots. Have y'all seen those? This one is a little bit small. This is actually a windowsill. Jiffy Seed Mix Company creates this. They've got the plastic pan, the peat pots, and they got little soil cubes that you put in there and just add water and it swells up and all that. But this one also has the little plastic window dome that you can put over it. And that one would sit right on a windowsill and make it real easy about getting light. If you did that, you'd want to put it on the south side of your house. Why?
Most light during the winter?
Well, that's where your sunshine's coming from, so that's a good place to put it, right? Okay. So, Teresa, I know you're going to talk about a couple things. Anything I need to add on this? Any questions on this so far? So what do you want to plant right now? Spinach for sure, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, any of the cold crops we call them.
Potatoes in about 3 weeks.
Yeah, potatoes generally about right the end of March is a good time to plant those. But be prepared to cover them up if you have to, right?
Sweet potatoes you can plant right now and start to slips.
Right. Okay.
Kentucky Farmers Market.
Okay. I know there's a farmer's market here at Huntsville, right? And we have one in McCreary County behind the McCreary County Conservation District office where ours is under a shed. Our farmer's market starts in mid-May this year. It's on a Saturday from 9 to 12 during the morning on a Saturday. Rhonda, do you know when Tennessee's is going to be starting this year?
Teresa's going to
Talk about that. Okay. But anyway, if you're
mid-May.
mid-May, I don't know if it's, I think it's 15th or something like that. I think the 1st is on a Saturday, if I'm not mistaken, so that'd probably be the 15th. But it's that middle Saturday in May. If you're from Kentucky, of course, if you're from Tennessee and you want to sell up there, we'd be glad to have you. A lot of fun. We build community up there. I was involved in starting that farmer's market up there, helping to start it. And I've been up selling stuff there and taking up my Saturday mornings all through the summer and making very little money, but mainly just to be there and to support. And it's growing every year and we have a lot of fun. So if you're interested in doing that, I'll try to let everybody know in the Grow Appalachia program when we're going to have a vendor meeting sometime here, probably within the next month or so.
And it's really great for people like me who my property is on a hill, and I experimented a lot last year trying to plant things in certain places so I could have some fresh produce myself. And it didn't work out so good, so I'm going to experiment some more. But the farmer market for me is awesome to go out and be able to get the fresh produce and stuff that I can't grow right now. I've got to come up with some ways. I've got some learning to do.
And the reason I didn't make very much money is because I bought other stuff. It ended up costing more than what I sold.
Well, over the years, there has been over $1 million worth of organic produce sold at farmers markets through the Grow Appalachia program. So that's quite a bit of money in the farmers markets. And we normally have a table set at the Scott County Farmers Market that'll be available. So if you have, you're not looking at this, you're not thinking, you're sitting there right now, you're thinking, I'm not selling nothing. But you end up with like bushels of cucumbers. Then you can come and just sell those cucumbers or your tomatoes or your zucchini. You know, you can just come for that one Saturday. And we normally have a Grow Appalachia table that's reserved. You might have to share it one Saturday if you both show up. Somebody does. But that'll be available, and that way we're encouraging you to grow more than you need. Whether you're going to sell it
or share it or whatever, drop it off at the food bank. We're encouraging you to share from this program. We're not going to say, oh, did you see them selling that? That's not going to happen. We're encouraging that for you, so please do that. Our market, we're having a vendors meeting next week. And
yes, it'll be Tuesday at 1 p.m. in this room. It's open to the public, so if you're interested in learning some ideas we have, we're having it open to the public so we can hear ideas just to help make it as strong as it can be.
Yeah. So and after that meeting, we'll probably make an announcement online. It'll be in the paper and on the radio of when those markets will get closer to opening. So we hope we see you. We've got some exciting things planned for this year, so we hope that you come by. Now, Doug did a wonderful presentation on seed starting in trays. And I still do this. I have my grow light up now at my house, and I have stuff about this big. I am fascinated with watching that stuff sprout. And my husband makes fun of me because I'll check it like 10 times a day. And he'll say, did something else sprout? And I'm like, actually, something else did sprout. Thank you very much. I love it. But now I've discovered something about 5 years ago that's just as much fun. And it's a totally different. He was military, we moved. I didn't always have an apartment that had lights or had enough light coming in the window or space. So what do you do then? If you don't have a spot in your house to sow, if you don't have adequate lighting and things like that, and you've not done it for 20 years and you've not collected all the paraphernalia that Doug and I have, what do you do? This is so much fun. This is water jugs, translucent milk jugs. If you can see your hand through it, then it will work. If it's the solid white or solid yellow, it will not. So what you do with this is you're going to poke holes in the bottom first. If you do it after you cut it, it's a lot harder. 1 or 2 holes in the top. Throw the lid away or you'll forget and leave it on. It doesn't work then. But I cut this so that I have a hinge at the back. I just didn't cut the back of it. And it comes open. Once you've done this, you're going to put about 3 to 4 inches of soil in here and kind of mash it down a little bit and sow your seeds in it. And depending on what I'm sowing and how big or little, I might put 9 seeds or 15 seeds or whatever based on how big that seedling's going to be. And you put it in the snow. You just put it outside. I planted this one in January. It has been outside the whole time. It's taped shut. A lot of people online, if you Google winter sowing, that's what this is called. And a lot of people use duct tape, but I like the clear tape because I like to watch what's going on, and the duct tape got in my way. So I planted this in January, and I set it outside, and it's been out there in all the freezes and all the things. I've got 37 of these sitting in my backyard. But I went out there after the snow melted this week. And I've got one little bitty green seedling that's came up so far, and it's a perennial phlox. And I thought, oh, we've got rain and snow coming. Is it too early? Well, I have some planted at the corner of my yard. And Avery and I walked over there last night and looked. Guess what's turning green? That phlox is. This is called winter sowing, and they tell everybody to trust the jug. Glenda Jeffers, I want you to do 1 jug for me. Just 1. And then you can come back and tell everybody how it worked. I've done this for years. It is so much fun. I've done my tomatoes and my peppers that way. And I was heartbroken last year. My sissy's in the back. And she had tomatoes about 2 weeks earlier than I did. And I felt like, Grow Appalachia gave away those tomato plants. They're so pretty and big. Mine's like this big. But when they came along, they were very strong. They were strong roots. I had tomatoes all the way up until the killing frost. They were very healthy plants. So I urge you, you're not going to want to do tomatoes. You're going to get some free tomatoes and peppers. But did anyone buy a tomato plant last year? And know what those things, what'd you pay for your tomato plants? Outrageous, wasn't it? So since I was paying for mine, I was a lot happier with my $2 pack of seeds that I had to wait an extra 3 weeks on and have my 30 tomato plants.
Do you have to harden those off?
No, you do not harden them off. As he was talking about, if you start inside, you have to take them outside for an hour and 2 hours and let them get used to the sunshine. They've been out there in the sun and the wind the whole time. There is no hardening off. It's a lot of fun. I urge everyone in here to do 1 jug.
put you some kale, some spinach, something like that you're gonna get tonight. Do 1 jug, but if you're gonna do this, it needs to go out quickly. It needs the freezing and the thaw and all of that to help make it work. So go ahead and get it out there. You too, Tracy, 1 jug. Okay, it's a lot of fun. I urge you to try it, and that's just for mine. I'm gonna do some leeks here soon because I never know when to plant them, and I thought this way I'll just know it'll do it on its own. But if I love gardening, I love starting things from seeds. You're gonna get some seeds. I urge you to try it. And you can plant your stuff the way we've always learned how to do from our grandmas and grandpas. But I'm gonna urge all of you to do 1 jug and let me know how it goes. It's a lot of fun. And that's it for me. We talked about the farmer's market.
You have, you sent me the paperwork on.
Yes, we have, and this should be in your paperwork from tonight.
Okay, so you've already.
They already have it.
Okay, all right. I was gonna say I would email all that paperwork out, but you.
They should actually have 2 separate ones. One's a trifold and one was stapled together. And it's got the pictures in it. This is amazing, and you think it won't work, but it really will. There's several Facebook groups. Like I said, it's called Winter Sowing. Watch their pictures come back in. It's amazing, folks, especially with the cost of plants. Yeah. Huh?
Can anybody join?
The Facebook groups, you sure can. Winter Sowing. Okay, and that's...
And I want to mention one more thing before we finish up. We have Scott Christian Care Center Facebook page.
Yes.
Please go there. We'll put a lot of updates and things on there, and we have a page attached to that is
Grow Appalachia.
Grow Appalachia. So,
Yeah.
so visit those, and it's on that general information page where the addresses are. And go on there and check out those blogs.
Yes.
All the different sites. I think we're probably 25 now. Sites out there from West Virginia, Ohio. They all each blog too. So, and you can go on there and see Scott County, Kentucky's blog that I post each month.
Yeah.
So I encourage you to go, and they're on that general information page.
And if you send us some great pictures of your harvests, you may find your picture on that Facebook, on that blog page. Yeah.
It's such a help and a joy. So, and never think that you're oversending.
Yeah.
Because I can use them all.
One more thing that I'm going to harp on you every month about. As of right now, there is a date for a Scott County Fair. Gabe, is that correct? Okay. I am ashamed to go to that fair and ask, because when the way the fair works, you ask agents from other counties to come and judge your stuff. And I'm ashamed at how little produce we have. I'm ashamed to have to call these people and ask them to drive an hour to get in here and judge our produce. Please enter your stuff in the fair this year. Plan on it now. Have you some stuff coming along. Something I wasn't taught growing up, successive gardening, to where you planted everything in the spring and when it was gone, it was gone. You can scatter that stuff out so that your harvests last later into the year. You don't have to work hard canning it all at one time. So work on that, and please plan on entering something in our fair. We need that stuff.
Feel free to stop by the Scott Christian Care Center. Teresa has put in a raised bed there that acts as a low tunnel.
Yes.
And she has grown things all winter long in there.
We have
Tried different varieties.
Yeah. We have harvested spinach, kales, bok choy, which is a cross between a cabbage and a spinach, but arugula, we ate some radishes, carrots are coming on now. We planted that in October, and very few things died. Very few things got bit by the cold. And I planted the same things at my house and did not cover them. And I didn't have any more die at my house than they did. And that surprised me because we don't winter garden. How many here winter garden? How many here knew you could winter garden in Scott County? I didn't until after we retired and came back. And it makes me mad thinking about how hard our grandparents had it in this region because they didn't know that or didn't have the what they needed to make that happen. So we're going to talk a lot about that towards the end of the season. Check out the pictures on the Facebook page. It's amazing how well I went out there this week after this big freeze that we had and peeled that plastic open, and you would have thought it was August looking up in there. It really looked good. So, and I'm done.